Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Friday, July the 10th, 2026. We'll do a little bit of warm up and then we'll jump into the news. We'll scroll down the 24-hour peak chart first to see what people and bots are playing. Mecha Chameleon, kind of in a low spot for the new streamer bait hotness game in the 14th spot. Is there something above this that is bigger? I guess maybe Pal World 1.0 may be out, or people may be playing it because 1.0 is just about out. It certainly would be interesting to see the reviews in the next week or two on the 1.0 version, with people potentially coming back to it and less likely to just upvote it to support it in its, I assume, continuing lawsuit from Nintendo. Still not sure why Binding of Isaac Rebirth is in the 9th spot. Maybe this is just an indication that there aren't that many new games coming out, particularly for people who actually are wanting to play those games versus streamers and content creators, which I do think that there probably is some fun to be had in Mecha Chameleon, but nowhere as much as the excitement usually is around streamer bait games. What have I been doing? I was doing the follow list cleanup until the follow list and it stopped loading, which is funny because I got it down to slightly below 3,000 games. Just a massive amount of calling of games, mostly because of AI, a lot because it's been 6 months and they don't have any reviews and the games don't look that interesting to me in the first place, which it does seem like finally that process of having a follow list that's manageable is on the right path now. But yeah, this has happened in the past too, where there is just a bug in that the number of follow list games causes it to not load. The server times out. So I may very well be at the point where I can't do any more follow list cleanup, which means I probably need to go back and start playing Martian Memorandum, Tex Murphy Martian Memorandum again, just making content. I've also been playing Metroid Prime 1. I beat the game, but I'm not particularly happy with the experience of Metroid Prime 1. There is overall throughout the Metroid Prime 1 a whole issue in that there are areas where, unless you're just an absolutely great gamer, you are going to take damage, and the only way to really counter the damage you've taken or the missiles you've used is to just shoot a lot of the smaller enemies or crates around as you're wandering through places. It totally is a game designed to make you wander around. The placement of objects are not particularly great, as the ice spreader super missile for the ice gun is completely missable. I was able to find it, but only by looking up a walkthrough, and I got about 175 missiles, and I'm pretty sure there's probably 200 missiles in total. I'd be surprised if it is 255, but it could be 255 because you get a 5 missile expansion, and I was at like 81% completion. I didn't scan some creature somewhere, so I didn't have 100% scan log, which is way too easy for that to happen. But all of that is then pretty easily forgotten by the fact that the second to last boss fight, which happens right before the last boss fight, is super difficult. There's just a lot of it, a lot of pattern recognition, a lot of having to attack with charge shots and only charge shots at the right time, a lot of jumping to avoid taking damage. Or, yeah, I don't think dashing or using speedball or anything else really helps. The super bombs don't work at all in the last two boss fights at all, as far as I can tell. And for the most part, in the second to last boss battle, the ice gun and the electric wave beam gun are completely useless. You're either going to use the plasma gun or you're going to use the original starting charge shot, but you're not going to use a super missile or a flamethrower in the second to last boss fight because the character just moves around too much. That is their solution to the fact that they don't want all characters to be vulnerable to the same attacks. Then you get into the last boss battle, and there's literally 5 different sections there where you're, for the first 4 sections, doing the same thing over and over again. The final boss, I don't know why I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but I hate the way the final boss looks too. I hate that that is the Metroid Prime is what they're calling it, and it's just not anything close to what you would expect a Metroid to look like. Even Metroid Hunters, which maybe came from a different game, don't look like Metroids. You would expect Metroids to be the Metroid you're used to seeing, which are, I guess, supposed to be baby Metroids. And worse on that is Metroid Prime, once you defeat it, looks a lot like the blobs that kind of replace Metroids and all the creatures in Metroid Fusion, which I definitely don't like those creatures either. So yeah, even with the advanced ability to make save spots and checkpoints that are not there in the game using the emulator, I had to try dozens and dozens of times to beat the last 2 bosses. Some of that maybe is the difficulty around the button placements compared to a GameCube controller versus a Steam Deck. Like, Steam Deck button layout is very different from GameCube layout. Some of that may also be that these games are just really difficult. I want, at the end of every Metroid game, like maybe even after the credits roll, for you to get a save spot that would then just tell you where all the collectibles are. And I don't know if Metroidvanias even now are doing something like that, but they totally should. Like, there's just no point in a world that has the internet, or even a world that has strategy guides, to not integrate into the map locations of things you haven't collected as an interactive map. Maybe you don't do it immediately. Maybe it's a handicap you can turn on. But yeah, there's like no radar at all to even generally say which room something is in, let alone finding that something. So the only way to perfect a experience of a Metroid Prime would be to follow a walkthrough exactly step by step, making sure you don't miss anything at all, which is really boring to have to go back and forth between some website full of ads to read the walkthrough and then back to the game. But yeah, I definitely think I will find some other game to play. I may be in a weird spot as far as me going down memory lane or playing old games I haven't played before, because it would be kind of crazy to play Ocarina of Time. I could skip it and play some of the Majora's Mask type games, which I haven't played those ever, so yeah, there's a good argument there. But yeah, I don't know if there's any more 2D Zelda games I have access to, and I was jumping between 2D Zelda games and 2D and Metroid games, Zelda games and Metroid games. Yeah. So yeah, I may have to throw in a Mario game too, just to keep it somewhat balanced. But yeah, I could play the original Metroid game, and it really wouldn't affect how quickly I get around to playing the remake of the Metroid game. I mean, I could play the original Ocarina of Time, and it wouldn't really affect how quickly I get around to playing the remake of Ocarina of Time, because that's probably years from now, and yeah, even longer, because it'd be kind of crazy for me to buy a Switch too. Just to play 1 or 2 games. But yeah, I'm done with Prime 1. There is a lot of stuff, obviously, that they were working on and transitioning to 3D with, and learning during the process. But yeah, there is, in retrospect, compared to modern games, a lot of problems with it too. An interesting point is that you don't even have the rush to escape sequence at the end of Metroid Prime. It is just a cutscene. You do have those weird voiceovers where the narrator talks at the very beginning of the game and at the very end of the game, and that's the only time the male narrator talks. There are a few other places. Well, I think maybe the male narrator says Impact Crater when you get into the Impact Crater, which is a forced save spot. So honestly, I don't think I could go back and get the collectibles. Come to think of it, yeah, I don't think I could. I think if I load the save file, it will take me to the Impact Crater. There's no way to leave the Impact Crater and go back to the rest of the game. It is also kind of noticeable that when it resets the game, it straight up just resets the whole system. Which, yeah, that was done by a few games, certainly, where the whole system would just have a bit of RAM holding information and being reset, or a save file and being reset, making it look like it was a load screen, but really it was just resetting the whole system, which that wouldn't really work for modern operating systems unless they tweak them quite a bit. There's just too much loading and setup going on. Linux in particular, I think, would really struggle to be modified so that you could just reset the whole hardware and not have to initialize a bunch of stuff and take forever and run tests. Yeah, Windows is really not that much faster when you actually do a real reboot and not just a fake reboot, which Windows has the ability to just save your state and reboot and reload that same state. But that will crash anything changes. I'm not sure if, yeah, you could like have a USB-C device plugged in, do a fake reboot, and during the process unplug the USB device, and whether that would crash it or not. But pretty much any other hardware change will. I have also been working on replacing my news macros, which I ran the old macros. I turned on the another extension I had, and I think that mostly fixed everything that was going wrong with my news macros for the meantime. So we are back to going through the news articles by website for today, which is the way that makes sense. But yeah, I've run into a little bit more friction programming the Violent Monkey script that I'm working on to replace it, in that the set values with an S, plural, and get values with an S are differently set up than what I was expecting. And so basically it is designed for you to set the values kind of when you need to, probably only once during the execution, and get all the values at the beginning once. So instead of having several different values that you would get several different times, it is just a label and value pair system, which creates objects, which is a fine way to do it. It's just not the way I was really expecting to do it. So yeah, I am wrapping my brain around the Grease Monkey API, which I think I'm using. Well, I think Violent Monkey uses the old Grease Monkey API, which was replaced, and that was kind of part of the problem with Grease Monkey and its eventual just being completely different, or I think not even supported anymore. Yeah, I'm making minor bits of progress, having to rethink how it's all going to be done. In particular, what my macro does is it looks at every single link in a loop, whereas the systems now really want to just give you an array of all the links at once, and so it's a lot more of array manipulation using a function called sum, and then includes, just to figure out if I'm going to have to test the array to see if it contains the links that we've already looked at, and if it does, cut the array down. Splice it is the function, and splice usually means to add two parts, but or add something to the array, but you can configure it to actually eliminate things. So yeah, suffice it to say, I'm not really in the mindset at the moment for array manipulation, and so I'm having to relearn all of that and get that going, which inherently, this level of learning is something that I am going to have to reapply to the slideshow script, which is technically still going to be a less complicated script, but it is a good reason why I really haven't finished the slideshow script, because it felt like I could have finished that probably weeks ago, but had I finished it then, it would have been done in basically the wrong way. So yeah, I'm making small bits of progress, but not a ton. Also, I said yesterday that I said Wednesday that I was going to be busy with other stuff, and I was busy with other stuff, fixing my smart bird feeder, putting a hummingbird feeder and a suet feeder in front of the camera of the bird feeder on a pole, so installing a pole. It wasn't a super long process, but it was outside and somewhat exhausting. I had gotten this water backpack and I was trying to test that, and a couple problems with it. One, if you're a big person, you're gonna struggle to get the water backpack to fit. It's definitely feels like it's more for smaller adults, but also it's gonna be somewhat strong adults because you're putting a decent amount of water on your back too. So, which is, I imagine, about a day's worth of water. The way it works is kind of interesting in that it's this piece of rubber that you bite in, and when you bite it in, the rubber deforms in a way that water can come through the tube, and then you can suck water through the tube. It also comes with a problem of tasting a little bit like plastic and needing an extra cleaning process before you start. So yeah, it's nice to have, but honestly I think what you might end up doing is just putting it on the back of a car seat instead, and then in the car the water might heat up, but if you brought it for a long trip it would be fine there. And it's probably a decent way to carry a little bit more water in an emergency situation or a camping situation or a hiking situation, but it isn't a bunch of jerry cans that you would load into a Jeep and fill up if you were in a real emergency situation or post-apocalypse situation, which isn't likely to happen. Still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. I have probably 90-95% of the newest expansion, but then there always is this struggle to get the last few cards, and in general there's a struggle to find people that you can trade with because they don't have enough of the new cards that people want. But yeah, the strategy here, while staying free to play, is to have a lot of extra card pack pulls ready and lined up every time there's a new expansion. And it's kind of hard to have those extra pulls lined up. Looks like Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is doing a new thing. Probably not anything too interesting, though, because their new stuff comes around all the time. Yeah, I'm still playing Memento Mori, and I'm maybe having 2 months here where there aren't any real new characters to collect. So both my accounts may be hitting a point where it is pretty saturated, which is kind of fine by me. It lets me save up some premium crystals that you earn or pay for and wait for the next expansion, because when they do introduce a new character there is still a small possibility that you won't get that new character unless you have a pile of crystals to guarantee potentially 100 draws. But the other aspects of powering up a character may hit a wall at some point too, because there's a lot of other resources that you have to manage and that you just don't get from crystals alone, or would be very expensive if you spent crystals on them. And yeah, overall I think I've spent the most amount of time on Metroid Prime. It's incredibly boring during the summer. Nothing's really happening in the world that I'm interested in. It's also incredibly hot. I think yesterday I hit a new peak of 50 kilowatts in a day. Although in fairness, yesterday I also had the front door open. It would have been wise for me to turn off my air conditioner. I have also really determined that the umbilical cord on my compressor is exposed and not insulated right, and very possibly there's a whole piece of metal missing that should be there. So yeah, I put it off till the end of the month to have replacement stuff, and frankly it's going to probably be a nightmare to try and replace the foam myself, but it needs to happen. I have a small hope that when I get this new dryer installed, one of those people might be good and willing to take on some other work, but otherwise I'm gonna have to find yet another handyman, somebody that hopefully one of these days I'll find a handyman that actually takes pride in their work and does it right. Don't really have anything to say about Steam hardware. It is interesting that the playtime here has spun around, and they're saying that Room Planner was the last game I played. Of course, it should be Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the last one I played. I have Yu-Gi-Oh! Set as private, and I forgot that I'd done that. And that's just because when I launched Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't want people to think I'm actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And that they should hop in and play Yu-Gi-Oh! But yeah, as far as followed games, I got it down to 2,897, and I was into the B's, which means I was not that far away from wrapping around, which was the point where I was going to stop and say, okay, this macro has proven it works completely, and because of that there's no reason to really wrap around. I do ideally want it to get down to closer to 1,000 games at most, but I also am not putting a lot of mental energy into looking at games and deciding whether I actually want them on the wish list or not. I am eliminating the bottom of the barrel stuff that has AI in it, or that doesn't support my language, or just looks absolutely awful. So, also I'm eliminating a lot of things that just don't have release dates, too. Suppose my opinion hasn't changed too much. I still think like a refurbed Steam Deck here still kind of makes some sense, particularly if you can get like a 256 or even 512 LCD model. It starts to get a little ridiculous when you're getting refurbed OLEDs. You might as well just get a new OLED, despite the prices being really expensive. And then the Steam Machine question, I think still kind of makes some sense too. DF Retro came out with a Power is at 1.0, and it's rated very positively. Let's actually look at that. The DF Retro, when you really narrow your focus and are saying, hey, I want this to run between 1080 30 frames per second consistent, which would be medium to low settings on a lot of games, or even on some games 1080p 60, it can get fairly consistently good. I think the Steam Machine in its current state can handle that. The problem is when they start to plug a Steam Machine into a monitor instead of a TV, that's when the Steam Machine's admittedly underpowered hardware starts to really show its flaws. Or when you start to plug it into a 4K TV and have the Steam Machine try and upscale to 4K, that's when you start to see its flaws. But I think the problem definitely is also a bigger conversation around upscaling that those in the know have been having for years, in that if you are not running a native resolution of the game, you're not seeing actual pixels made by the actual game engine. You're seeing pixels that are being made up by some upscaling engine, basically generative AI. And in a lot of cases it doesn't matter and it's unnoticeable, but it also is just you're not getting what you really ordered. I mean, if you ordered a cake and half of the cake was just the picture of a cake and half of the cake was actually cake, you'd be upset. I don't see a real reason to feel any different there. Although weirdly, when you talk about like wedding cakes, a lot of times those really fancy cakes have an eating cake that is much smaller, or one lower tier of the cake that's edible, and then there's a lot of cardboard and PVC tubing of the inedible stuff, or a lot of fondant, which most people don't want to eat fondant on cake. Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced has also come out, and people are unhappy with it because I believe it has microtransactions that have been added to the game, so it's not really a faithful recreation of the game. And it also has, I believe, like 7 DLCs that are not included in the deluxe edition of the game. So there's just a ton of over monetization in a full price game, or a remake of a older game, which also, it's worth pointing out, doesn't include some of the content in the original Black Flag game. So that is something too. Seems like the mixed reviews when it first launched have now turned to 72% positive. So I guess the anger may have been a few more vocal people and hasn't really continued. But yeah, there's 9 DLCs here, adding up to $84, where the deluxe edition is $70 for an old game. So they really are trying to get people to pay $150 for the game with microtransactions. But yeah, maybe the case here is that there is just a lot more people positively reviewing the game. Although it is also questionable, are we at the point where there is straight up astroturfing that is happening on reviews on video games? There almost certainly has to be. Like, I can't legitimately make a claim that Ubisoft is just paying people to write positive reviews, but I do have to assume that someone out there is, because there has just not been any story ever of Valve publicly coming out and punishing or removing reviews for games that were paid for. Also noticing, since these are all new reviews, that a significant number of these reviews include the reviewer's PC specs, which probably will make the Steam machine blush on how a lot of the people who actually bought it to review games are going to have more powerful hardware too. It does seem like this direct from Steam may also be new. But yeah, you could even see a case where a company itself may not be paying for positive reviews, but the developers and / union might be paying people to give positive reviews to the game because they may have a bonus tied into it. But also I imagine there might be just a ton of fandom for this game still. And let's face it, the reality is the number of just people who just want to play games and might even review and positively say things about games is probably a lot higher than people who want to take a stand against microtransactions and shady business practices and just really expensive things. Or it may very well be the case that there's just not enough people organized enough to be angry at two things at once, and the PlayStation removal of discs fight is just the bigger fight that's happening right now, which I saw a Reddit post saying that a considerable percentage, somewhere between I think 62%, maybe 82% of PlayStation gamers are considering the move to PC. And also I've seen stories of a lot of people just buying PlayStation discs now, or which in the long run, if you buy a bunch of PlayStation discs now, you're either just not going to buy any new games in the future, or you're going to move to PC anyways. Yeah, look at all the different Ubisofts that worked on this game, and almost certainly you're going to have announcements in the next couple of weeks of one or two of those Ubisoft studios being shut down, particularly the ones outside of France. Yeah, I could see all of these studios being shut down. Maybe keep Quebec, but Shanghai, Philippines, Montpellier, Kiev, India, Chengdu, Belgrade, Bordeaux, Barcelona, Singapore. I can see them all being shut down now that Black Flag is out. This was a game that was reviewed, I think, highly into the 90s when in its original form, and there very arguably still may be a good reason to play the original form instead of just this different version. And certainly they don't have time to remake anything else, and they don't have anything else to remake as far as the Assassin's Creed games go, unless they're gonna try and reboot the whole series, which I doubt. They've already done that with Odyssey and Origins. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this is kind of all we're going to hear from Assassin's Creed for several years too. Palworld is at 1.1 in the last 30 days. It's overwhelmingly positive at 95%. Yeah. Well, I do have some small trepidation that Palworld is not a great game playing alone without online co-op. It probably is a very playable game. And yet what we aren't seeing here is any major complaints of any kind that the 1.0 version feels unfinished. Although maybe the attitudes might change, because you also are getting a lot of positive reviews right as the 1.0 is out. Maybe once you start to get through all of the remaining content, the feelings might change, which is definitely something to consider too when thinking about the games as they come out, is that there is just not a large tendency to have people who have played all of it. Although Echoes of Aincrad also is out and it's getting mixed reviews. So, yeah. It definitely is an argument to wait until people played all they're going to play of a game. The Steam Summer Sale is finally over. That went rather long. Not a huge amounts of stuff going on there, but yeah. Sales will continue. Although a lot of the sales that happen are increasingly feeling like the quote-unquote sales you see on Amazon.com, where the prices are on sale for almost half the year. And so there is just a question as far as whether any of that is a thing. I haven't really thought about the personal calendar. That might be an easier way to clean up the follow list too. Although I doubt I would change the method now that I've made some decent amount of progress already with the follow list cleanup system. And the personal calendar would only show me games that are on my follow list that haven't come out yet. And I'm still very tempted to buy a Steam machine, although I did just buy a dryer too, so for just about the same amount of money I bought a dryer when all was said and done, when you add taxes and delivery and haul away fees. So yeah, it does make a lot of sense to not buy a Steam machine, and I don't even really have a great plan for it. I have thoughts once I get my whole house clean and decluttered, but that is a project that has been in the works for at least a year and a half and has stalled mightily. I was expecting, being outside in the heat even a little bit yesterday, that I was going to feel kind of miserable and tired and such, but so far I haven't had that reaction. In fact, I haven't had that reaction in a while. I don't know if that is possibly partly done to down the air conditioning or what. But yeah, there's more work to be done, and I just need to start focusing in more on that now. All over the place. Need to get my router done too. It's the router, the new router and the old router are both in the floor right now. And one of these days I'm gonna trip and fall on them and just break them if I'm not careful. So yeah, the problem with the personal calendar is that while it may highlight a few things, it is also going to not mention anything that's been on the fall list for a long time. And so this is too leading edge of a way to do things. This might be good for other content creators if you're just very minimally putting things on the fall list or the wish list, which is where it's, I assume, getting all these games. There might be an idea there, although it may also be that, like, I don't recall putting this on the fall list. Let's open this game just to see. It may be just looking at tags and randomly assigning things based on more complicated methods. Clearly, if they are using complicated methods, they aren't trying to have a new game in every single day, but there is definitely a desire, I think, to have at least one new game every single week. This Rydo game looked interesting. I saw Cracking the Cryptic playing an early version of that, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes when it actually is out. Yeah. So this Mr. President game is in early access, which I changed the text early. It has AI in it, and I saw it July 10th. And we can see it just closed then, which we are not. Today is July 10th. Yeah. It's got two different ways it fills out that. Interesting. I'll have to look at that. So yeah, I've never seen this game, is the reality. So I don't know why it would be on the list. But it's going to close again in 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to make myself a note here, I think. Just to open up old-fashioned different formats of date on first visited. There we go. I will figure out why it's that way. Alright, well, then that is going to bring us to Video Games Chronicle articles. These warm-up sections taking less than an hour, which is a good move. Actually, today I'm experimenting on streaming. Since I've been waking up later in the afternoon, this is a stream where I've not even really eaten anything, so at some point I may literally have to take a dinner break in the stream. We'll see. So Nintendo confirmed Switch 1 sales aren't ending outside of Europe. That was pretty obvious, yet being the big point there. I suspect that there is a lot of Switch 1s in factories, on shelves in storage facilities still for around the world, and I would suspect that there's a lot of refurbing certainly that's going on too, for Switch 1s, since Switch 1 was super popular. I would be surprised if there's actually any facility that is still making Switch 1s. And I would be surprised if there's an easy way to even get the components, even the screens, let alone the CPUs and RAM for a Switch 1. But eventually they are going to run out of parts, and they will stop selling the Switch 1 at that point. The biggest issue, certainly there, is that the Switch 1 is probably a lot cheaper than the Switch 2, and Nintendo hasn't done a great job of convincing people to move to a Switch 2, and frankly, they may have a little bit of fear that if they tried to force everybody to a Switch 2, people would just not buy a Switch 2 and maybe jump to PlayStation, which would be kind of crazy. Maybe jump to PC, which would make more sense, or maybe even jump to Xbox, which would be kind of crazy. The options are getting worse, certainly though, so I could see a point in the future where Nintendo just says you have to buy a Switch 2 to play Switch 1 games or Switch 2 games. In that same theme of the options not getting better, Xbox Game Pass has reportedly lost millions of users since 2024. Game Pass subscribers are down to 30 million, according to reports. That would be a 4 million user decline, which is very believable. But there is definitely a question of whether or not these 4 million users are going somewhere else. Yeah. This may very well be the case that those 4 million users shifted to PlayStation and now are mad at PlayStation, or it may be the case that 4 million users just are broken, have decided not to buy any game console subscription service. Some of these articles are old. I had to manually open the Video Games Chronicle news today because I left my script, which is broken at the moment, running. So my broken script broke the old news macros. But yeah, Microsoft laid off the 37-year veteran behind Xbox backward compatibility. Toys for Bob still wants to work on Banjo-Kazooie. Obsidian canceled Avowed to focus on a new Fallout game. A id Software dev claims it's been, quote, regulated to a support studio size, or as 136 layoffs have been confirmed. Which, yeah. I didn't know that you had to do a warn notice in Texas. But yeah, 96 workers in Richardson, Texas were laid off, and a further 40 remote roles have been cut for a total of 136 jobs, which 96 workers definitely seems like more than enough to start a whole new company if one person can be the boss and can fund that. Otherwise, you'll just see these people go on to other careers and very possibly other industries. But yeah, and the remote workers could be brought back in if they're good or not. Inherently, when people are laid off, it's not usually a statement on the quality of their employment, of their work. This does also give these workers potentially a opportunity to reset a lot of things, whereas they may very well be good at using id Tech. id Tech, I think, as a engine that they now can't use because they don't work for id, was pretty much a dead end, which may actually mean that a lot of these workers are going to struggle to get work anywhere else because they're going to have to learn some other programming thing. Game engine, probably Unreal Engine. I'd like to see it be Godot Engine, but let's face it, if you're making a first-person shooter type game like Doom Eternal, you probably are going to go with Unreal Engine before you went with the Godot engine. So yeah, it's, I think, going to be slightly harder for these id Tech people to get work because they were working on the id Tech engine. And then id Software itself is probably just going to be a sports studio, and if there is any new Doom game that ever gets greenlit, I wouldn't be surprised if it is handed to somebody in Activision or some other department of Xbox, whether or not Xbox even stays as part of Microsoft. Moving on, the fired Marathon director says he's settled a lawsuit with Sony and been inserted into the credits. Christopher Barre announced he settled his lawsuit with PlayStation and Bungie. He was fired for misconduct, that's what they said. They say that he sent inappropriate messages to female employees. Barre denied the claims and called the investigation led to his firing a sham. So, who knows what to believe there. Notably, he alleged that Sony fired him in order to avoid paying him more than $45 million in bonuses generated from its 2022 purchase of the studio. That also seems believable. After a year of back and forth accusations, the lawsuit was dismissed for a lack of jurisdiction, only to be refiled earlier this year. Which probably means he got his bonuses too. No more details were shared, but suffice it to say, he also isn't getting an apology for being accused of making inappropriate comments in an email. Who knows what level of inappropriate comments were made, if any, because yeah, you can construe almost anything as inappropriate if you're looking hard enough. But yeah, one more lawsuit has a resolution, not a very satisfactory resolution because we don't get any details, which is the way it usually goes in these lawsuits. And one more news story proves to be ultimately pointless. If I was hiring someone and I saw that they had accusations against them and they were fired for misconduct, and then they sued the person, and then they come to some agreement, I'm not going to be very interested in hiring that person because, yeah, there's just too much mud that's been slung on that person at that point. Let's see. Moving on, you can now try Nintendo's best Switch 2 games for free. Nintendo has released a Yoshi and the Mysterious Book demo. It is interesting to say Yoshi and the Mysterious Book is one of Switch 2's best, Nintendo's best Switch 2 games, because it really just highlights that there aren't that many Switch 2 games, I think, more than anything else. Although the game may be great, I certainly didn't hear a lot of people talking about the game or playing the game. I'm still very much in that situation where I have struggled to find anybody's opinion who I trust or like to talk about games, that actually play games. And so, yeah, I definitely just am not seeing a lot of reviewers. I did see on the YouTube channel Sex Positive Gaming that the game they gave, or she gave, to in 2024 as the adult game of the year has been delisted from Steam. In this case, it seems like it was a Chinese game, and adult games are illegal in China. Particularly, they're targeting LGBTQ game creators in China, and there had already been the stories of them, the makers of that game, being arrested, possibly disappeared in China. So this is more of a censorship of the Chinese government than a censorship of Steam itself or the United States government / payroll processors debanking it. But yeah, censorship nonetheless. Which yeah, adult games do seem to just be disappearing more and more, and definitely not getting made as much for that audience, particularly on Steam, but just anywhere. Moving on, hundreds of layoffs have been confirmed at the Elder Scrolls Online studio as devastating Xbox cuts continue. State confirms over 200 cuts at ZeniMax Online. These are more warn notices, and maybe this is an indication that laying someone off and putting out a warn notice is something that happens close to each other, but the warn notices seem to become public information weeks later. This is in Maryland this time. On one hand, if it was a precise surgical cutting, which this clearly is not precise surgical layoffs, getting rid of Elder Scrolls Online in general will lose you money, but it will start to lay a foundation of the content that's being added to Elder Scrolls Online should have been in the next single player Elder Scrolls game instead. But that's not something that warrants laying off. That's something that warrants taking ZeniMax Online and saying, we're going to put out less content or no new content for Elder Scrolls Online, and we're going to shift all of our focus to putting that new content into the next Elder Scrolls game. Or, frankly, they could have just said Elder Scrolls Online is getting a single player mode, and it is the way Elder Scrolls is going to be presented going forward. But yeah, more layoffs are happening, which I have to point out, it's important to now really pay attention to how Asha Sharma, the new CEO of Xbox, is running things, even if you're not really that interested in how video games are being run, because she's just been hired to sit on the board of a government position, I think at the Federal Reserve, which we'll see that news story, but that really puts everything in a completely different light when you see the massive slash and burn things that are happening at Microsoft, which maybe needed to happen at Microsoft, but if that same type of leadership gets applied to the entire Federal Reserve or in policies that affect everybody in the United States, that could be really, really bad. Or it might be good. It's possible it might be good. I doubt it, though. In particular, the Federal Reserve needs to move at a glacial pace, in my opinion, and not make any big changes. So her being on the board and making major changes is going to create too much instability for a good economy. Moving on, the former video game 24/7 editors launch a new publication. Respec aims to offer a new independent voice in a shrinking games media. This feels very much like that that website that rebranded itself, or a lot of people broke off and formed a website. I can't even remember the name of it. Not NeoGAF, but yeah, I think it had re in the name. But yeah, the problem here is that the thing that I didn't personally like around Video Games 24/7 and Eurogamers, which is why they are not one of my news sources, almost certainly came from the editor-in-chief and editorial director. So I really have no interest in even checking out Respec. Almost certainly this is a case where it will have the same problems, which I vaguely recall it was just a lot of more opinionated not really think pieces, just political yellow journalism propaganda pieces, where I try to find a pretty flat news source where I'm not bristling at editors-in-chiefs and editorial directors putting in propaganda or political talk into everything. In fairness, I will say GameDeveloper.com is very much pro-worker, pro-union, pro-industry, a little bit less. But Eurogamer, Video Games Chronicle, as a news source, is mostly just over fascinated with Pokemon and centered around European news, but isn't really pro-European propaganda. Komatsu tends to cover more Japanese news and in English, which is helpful, and then Gaming on Linux is obviously Linux focused, but the most political of them is GameDeveloper.com, for what you would call political, and that's about as much as I can take. It is also worth pointing out that there is this just large group of people who mostly made up mainstream video game journalism that worked for Ziff Davis at one point, or IGN, or GameSpot. There are basically 4 or 5 companies that have just been buying up and paying for the salaries of mainstream video game journalists for a very long time, and those companies are moving towards just replacing everybody with AI because they don't care. We've certainly seen this happen many times over, and it never really works. None of the people who were originally part of the Giant Bomb team are interesting now that they're independent. None of the escapist people, even the Yahtzee character, is interesting enough to keep my attention once they went through many cycles of going independent and then stopping being independent and going independent again. At some level, YouTube is probably destroying the whole business model, but I think AI is destroying it more nowadays. But I also just complained about not having anybody that's really good at reviewing games, and I definitely don't think there's too many people who are giving out good video game news on YouTube. First source video game news in particular, like my streams here, certainly don't work if Video Games Chronicle and Komatsu and GameDeveloper.com all shut down. I'd have to find some new news sources. So yeah, this is probably a little bit of cronyism too. Like, if I formed a new publication, me personally, Video Games Chronicle would not report on that, certainly. So there's definitely some picking and choosing that would happen there. Speaking of picking and choosing, one of the things that's peeving me off is that you have to be in the YouTube Partner Program to use their new shows feature to turn a playlist into a show, despite the fact that that was generally how I was thinking about all of my pre-recorded content, and I would love to experiment and convert things to a show. It wouldn't be particularly great, and one of the things that they mention is that they're looking for high quality content, which means I think that at some point they may be hand-picking things that get to stay as shows, and then they're going to convert a lot of things that try to be shows back into playlists, because they definitely want us to feel like a TV show that would air on a TV channel or a streaming channel. But yeah, every time I cover a game, that is very much episodic content, and it is very much a show. Do I have the cover art? No. Should I use AI? Probably, but I'm not willing to do that to make cover art. Do I have special banner art, which seems like they might be asking for that? No. Is content from years ago going to be great? Not really. Is content from last week going to be great? Maybe not. Do I have a great idea to make it better? No. Not really. So yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye out for what kind of shows start to pop up, and see if there are any Let's Play type shows that make sense. Yeah. Speaking of shows, I didn't even mention that I finished Stargate Atlantis. Pretty boring, just trying to 4 or 5 seasons of just trying to continue and do the same thing that Stargate SG-1 did, with the Wraith and their replicators really being the only enemies they ever dealt with, and that almost every episode being about the Wraith or the replicators. It was pretty terrible compared to what it should have been, where they should have just been ripping off Star Trek The Next Generation and just have very individual standalone episodes. Almost all of the episodes in Stargate Atlantis continue in this series of telling one long story. So then I started to watch Stargate Universe, and boy is that not a Stargate show. Yes, it has a Stargate, but a lot of times they don't even really make any big deal about the Stargate, because there just isn't a lot of places they can go through the Stargate, and it is way more about being on the ship that they're stranded on, the Destiny. It definitely is shot completely different. It looks like the Battlestar Galactica reboot series. It is written that way. It is a complete real lack of a unified military operation. It's just a bunch of random people who accidentally got stuck together. So yeah, if Stargate Universe was called Battlestar Universe instead, it would make a lot more sense for the way it's shot, for the way it is written, for the stories. They mention like religion and God in it, which the only gods ever mentioned in Stargate were the golds pretending to be gods, the Egyptian gods. But yeah, or the Orais pretending to be gods. Yeah, it is just a completely different show that definitely doesn't feel like Stargate, which, yeah, probably explains why it didn't go that long. And certainly it would suck if that was the source material they were trying to do a new Stargate show on, if they were actually trying to make a new Stargate show. Because yeah, I think particularly now the nostalgia around SG1 is going to be a monster of the week type show, something simplistic and easy to understand and follow, much like in Supernatural. The episodes that are best to watch if you're just going to watch a random episode are the episodes that aren't centering around the longer narrative 15 seasons stuff that's going on. Yeah, I've already fallen asleep watching SGU several times in the past couple days, and yeah, I've definitely not been paying much attention to it at all. Of course, after Stargate SGU, I mean, unless I'm gonna watch like Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict or something really old, I don't know what I'm gonna move on to as far as the next old show that I'm wasting time watching or having play in the background. I'll stop watching things as much if I actually start to get back to recording footage. But yeah, I don't know why I took the extra time to even mention any of that, come to think of it. We're trying to go through the video game news, and that would have been stuff for the warm-up section. Does imply I certainly haven't warmed up completely, but that is the problem also of waking up later in the evening. The Doom Studio id Software pitched a Perfect Dark game before the Xbox cuts. The Quake Studio also said to have pitched a John Wick style original IP, which might have made a lot of sense. I would have to assume that this is a Perfect Dark game that was pitched after they announced the cancellation of the other Perfect Dark game, so I don't know if there really would have been anything there that would have caught people's attention. I think Perfect Dark as a concept is probably loved more than as an actual product, and I guess at some level the thought was they needed a Lara Croft spy type character, but do they really need that when they can just be the hardware that Tomb Raider games run on, or that James Bond games run on? I assume there might be a very good chance that none of the pitches were actually even heard by Asha Sharma, and yeah, I just wouldn't be surprised if that was not even a consideration by Asha Sharma. Again, I have to say, if this was a surgical layoff, a surgical shutdown, it might make some more sense. Like, id Software with the id Tech engine probably shouldn't be greenlit to make anything new with the id Tech engine. If you can't get them to move to a open Unreal Engine, then you would have to lay off most of the employees. A lot of these Texas-based companies definitely feel like they only exist because they're in Texas, where the unionization protections are very weak and laying people off is very easy. and pay in Richardson, Texas is probably somewhat high, but not that high compared to Redmond, Washington. But yeah, I would have a lot more faith in Ashley Sharma had they come out and said, we're going to reevaluate all of these companies and start laying people off or shutting down companies that make sense. But no, this is definitely taking a broadsword to cancer, and the patient very possibly is going to bleed out and die. In this case, Xbox being the patient, or Microsoft Gaming in general. So all of this news as far as layoffs and slashing really gets put into even a whole different situation now that Ashley Sharma has been named as an advisor. Okay, so she's not sitting on the board, I was wrong about that, to the US Federal Reserve on jobs and productivity. I wouldn't be surprised if that means that she has been hired not by the US Federal Reserve per se, but by the current presidential administration. She is the only active CEO to be on this federal task force, which means her inside manipulation trading can be even more powerful than people who are, quote, retired CEOs who probably still own a lot of stock in the companies that they would be advising for things to do. What in the world has she proven as far as knowing anything about jobs and productivity? I would heavily question. Clearly nobody showed me a deep dive in her experience and her performance before being CEO of Xbox, but after being CEO of Xbox, all she has done is lay off people. And I suppose if we want to collapse the capitalistic economy of the United States and just have massive unemployment and bread lines, maybe we hit that point. That way usually leads to some kind of economic revolution towards either socialism or communism after a great time of suffering and such. But yeah, the last time there was a massive unemployment and bread lines, there was barely the establishment of small social security things such as unemployment benefits and food assistance, mostly for women, children, and family. So even if something like that did happen, the United States would be very slow to adopt true protections of its citizens. Yeah, I seriously doubt she's going to get on this jobs and productivity advisory board. It probably is a board. It's probably an advisory board, and give any helpful advice. Then she's going to mention AI. This task force is going to operate independently. I mean, it kind of feels a lot like the Doge. Again, it feels like they're just going to advise a lot of people to be fired inside the Federal Reserve and gut the government systems and gut the economy. It's unclear how the appointments were made, but the former CEO of Walmart, Doug McMillon, is also going to advise on data. And being a former CEO, you almost certainly have tons of shares in companies in Walmart and are going to have a way of insider trading and manipulating things to your So yeah, this is weird to say the least. Yeah. And I can't help but wonder if she was appointed just because she has been talked about a lot as a new CEO, a new woman of minority heritage, at least. Those are all accusations that will be thrown at her, at least, is that she is just a diversity hire for this advisory board, or she is just being shown as a figurehead. But yeah. I can't imagine her inclusion is going to lead to more jobs being created. Although weirdly, I suppose at some point she may lay off enough people that she gets fired from Xbox, and then the next person has to go on a major hiring spree. But even if you go on a major hiring spree, you're just going to be hiring the youngest, newest, cheapest employees. You're not going to be hiring back old employees who actually have experience. Moving on, Mewtwo has taken over Times Square as Pokemon recreates the original Pokemon Go trailer. The 2016 trailer for the game saw hundreds of players take on Mewtwo. I also saw that there was a Mewtwo statue that they removed and said had disappeared from, I think, one of the Japanese Pokemon museums or something. Which, yeah, Pokemon Go, 10 years of harvesting your data. Can this really play? Or, and 10 years of people wasting time. So it looks like actual Go players info is just being put on the screens of Times Square, and basically this is all Times Square has become now, is a whole bunch of digital screens and a tourist trap. Mewtwo is showing there. It's a very unimpressive depiction, really. Just not that interesting at all. I was expecting that there would be a hologram projector in the middle of Times Square that would present Mewtwo, or maybe hovercraft lighting up to show Mewtwo in the sky or something. Yeah, that is really visually unimpressive. Let's see. This is probably the original trailer. And this Pokemon Mewtwo is a Pikachu. No, is a raid boss. So the general idea is that they have shields that can only be defeated by Mega Evolved Pokemon, which means most Pokemon won't be able to do anything at all. This is a great example of a BS trailer too, in that while you technically do something like this when you're playing Pokemon Go, it is nowhere as cool as this. They also have not really talked about that augmented reality game where you'd be wearing glasses and seeing Pokemon. There is also certainly a split there between the 2D graphics in the Pokedex of Pokemon and the 3D Pokemon that we now see in most games. Also, I have to point out there's just too many Pokemon fans out there who are too old to be into Pokemon. Like, I don't mean to yuck people's yum, but that even in this ad, you're seeing people who are like probably in their mid-20s playing 18-year-olds when Pokemon itself really should be a game for like 10-year-olds. Yeah, the trailer here for Mewtwo in Times Square looks way better than what they actually had going on in Times Square. And the technology exists. You could get like a misting system in Times Square to project a hologram. And frankly, that kind of technology might be very expensive for one thing, but could be used every week for something different. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some signage limitations, severe signage limitations for as many signs that exist in Times Square. But yeah. The fiction here, way more interesting to look at, but not even that interesting. But yeah, I do think that it probably would help the gaming community in general if a lot of Pokemon fans moved on to other creature collectors, other JRPGs, or just other games in general, and said, sure, I liked Pokemon when I was a kid, but I'm an adult now, I should diversify my entertainment. There are far too many people who autistically just watch The Office over and over again, or Friends over and over again, and they're not really doing society a lot of favors by consuming the same things over and over again. We're almost done with Video Games Chronicle articles. John Carmack has responded to id Software layoffs, admits that Microsoft's stewardship claim aging badly. The Quake and Doom programmer is saddened by this week's news of layoffs. Now, he was a co-founder of id Software, but I'm not sure he actually works at id Software anymore. And like historically he's very relevant, but I also am not sure that you don't run into the case where a decent programmer 10, 20, 30 years ago is not that relevant in modern times, because most decent programmers like John Carmack just got promoted to the point of being a co-founder and thus a upper manager instead of being a programmer who would learn new things. Yeah, apparently in the past he said Microsoft will probably be a good steward of the brand statement isn't aging well. And there's a founder reunion at QuakeCon next month. It is also certainly worth pointing out that yeah, he probably left after he sold id to Bethesda's parent ZeniMax. Yeah, he left in 2013, so it's been 13 years since he's even worked at id Software, and in that 13 years I don't think he's done anything or made anything, which kind of makes him a little irrelevant to even talk about now. Yeah, I assume he's just rich and either early retired or working in completely different industries. And this is one of those cases where he probably is rich and he probably should have been founding a new company with that riches and trying something different. He probably very much was wise to get away from id Tech and id Software, but he didn't go on to work on any other engines as far as I know. yeah, you can certainly see that his focus, if you look in the background art here, is not modern games. You have here a arcade 1-up with Joust set up on it, and then you have a rollerball, probably arcade 1-up recreation for, I forget what this game is, but it was fairly popular. But yeah, these are old school first generation arcade machines, maybe second generation arcade machines, not modern games by any means. Yeah, and maybe that is a big problem with mainstream video game journalism too, is that they are interviewing people who aren't really even affected of being laid off, when there's hundreds of people who have been laid off that would be better to interview. There's definitely a whole bunch of new programmers and younger programmers who should be interviewed, even if it is just on the condition of anonymity, which is very possibly will be the case because they don't want to get sued for breaking NDAs or miss out on any kind of final paycheck stuff, or anything like that. But yeah, mainstream video game journalists really should be reaching out to those people that have been laid off, the low-level, associate-level employees, not the former founder of id Software, who has really no skin in the game and doesn't really care that much. My lemonade got hot there and a little too acidic. Oh, yesterday I did try this misting fan I had gotten where you put ice water in the top of it. It ran for a good 8 hours, and for the most, at least 6 hours, it still had water misting at the lowest setting. But even in a like 10 by 10 foot room, it wasn't significantly changing the temperature in the room, which is not super surprising. It's definitely the kind of thing you might have on a table pointed directly at you, but then you would get fairly wet with the mister. And the mister makes a ultrasonic sound I can hear, so I found it somewhat annoying. Yeah, I was thinking misting fans might very well be better at their technology or more effective, but I kind of knew they weren't, because when you look at real systems that are designed to mist like a patio or porch, it is huge industrial fans with a massive amount of mist being sprayed out constantly, that barely is even doing anything in that case. But yeah, that was pretty much the only thing I got doing Prime Day that was even somewhat extra, and it's not a big loss. I'll use it every now and then. Yeah, I'm still rambling here. Yeah, Bethesda's union has confirmed the Xbox layoff is going to have them protest. We won't quietly disappear. It's called 1BGS. Wants to make the management think twice before ever attempting something like this again. Oh, make them think twice after the fact is not very much helpful. They really should be suing, but the truth is these unions haven't really negotiated any kind of contracts with Microsoft, so Microsoft was very much in a position where they could just lay off people, which is very often what happens when unionization happens too late, or unionization happens at all, is that the companies just refuse to form a contract, and then they just go on, they get laid off before that happens. The trick here for these unions was for them to go on strike before layoffs happened. Then there would have been some legal protections about firing striking union employees, but I wouldn't be surprised if all these layoffs include non-union employees, which is arguably a great reason to join a union the second it gets formed, so that you are not on the list of the employees that get laid off. In some levels, the unions may very well be fine that what they would consider scabs or non-union associate level employees get laid off. But yeah, one Bethesda game studio is a CWA affiliated studio union, and they're going to protest outside the Montreal, Rockville, Maryland, and Austin offices located in Montreal, Rockville, Maryland, and Austin on July 15th. So seems like a one-day protest. But yeah, there is a big difference between a one-day protest and being on strike for weeks, months, possibly even years. It is also probably very much a lot about media-facing possibilities these days, where standing in front of a office with some protest signs might get you on the local news. In the old days, it's not going to get enough people's attention and enough coverage compared to being on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and being reported by mainstream video game journalism, which will report it a lot, but that is still not enough coverage. They really need to be reported on mainstream online journalism in general. Alright, and that brings us to the end of our GameDeveloper.com, Video Games Chronicle articles. Let's look at the Gematsu articles. Ghost of Tsushima Legends anime character art teaser trailer is available. It's Ghost of Tsushima Legends as anime character art teaser trailer, which I guess it's the anime series. Okay, so even showing this teaser trailer, I have to stop at this point because it's probably going to be content ID'd from Crunchyroll. And it looks like in the trailer, all they were showing is this, which is just, shaded pencil sketching. Which, if that's what the anime looks like, that'll be fairly non-anime-like by my definition. It's not that bright, colorful style you tend to expect in an anime style. I'd say the anatomical proportions don't really scream anime either. So yeah, really doesn't show too much at the moment. Space Warlord Baby Trading Simulator is now available for the Switch 1 and 2. Quite the crazy name for a game. This is clearly a silly resource trading game that is very positive. So I can put it on the wish list, but at some point I am going to have to do a wish list cleanup, which I don't think I need to make any kind of macro to do a wish list cleanup. I really just need to look at every single game on the wish list and think about it. And I suppose I could even start doing that now if I can't do a follow list cleanup. But yeah, I really think I could only look at 4 or 5 games in a row before I'd stop paying enough attention to make those kinds of decisions. though, as far as the wish list cleanup is concerned, because it takes a lot more mental energy to make a decision versus loosely follow generic rules to say if something belongs on the wish list or the follow list. The game Once Human for the PS5 Xbox Series launches August 25th. Once Human is very positive here, but I don't have it on the follow list because it is an MMO and doesn't have any single player, thus the red single player icon has a button being added. Let's see. Sony Interactive Entertainment, that's PlayStation, announces their San Diego Comic-Con 2026 panels and activities, which it seems like it's Wolverine and God of War Lao Fei and Marvel Token Fighting Souls. Which that is, I suppose, an interesting thought about what do they want to show off at Comic-Con. San Diego Comic-Con certainly has become the place where everything except for comics are talked about and things get announced. And so at some point they really should just consider calling it something completely different. Because yeah, the number of new comic books coming out that anybody is talking about is zero. It also kind of highlights where Sony PlayStation seems to think the Western world is focused, in that you've got just a Marvel and a Marvel game here, Marvel game here, Marvel game here. And then you have the God of War game with a non-God of War character and a talking cube and talking magical ribbons on a magical sword. Which really doesn't scream God of War to me. Yeah. Weirdly, as far as new games that you would expect from PlayStation, we're just not seeing any of those at all. We're not, and I don't think any of those games are actually even PlayStation exclusives or first-party developed PlayStation games. There might be some funding going on there. This may very well be the case that you're seeing the future of Xbox in PlayStation, in that first party, second party developed games will just go away and PlayStation will be all about making profit on the hardware. That definitely feels like what Xbox wants to have happen. But yeah, no Last of Us, no Horizon, no Call of Duty, not Call of Duty, yeah, no Sackboy, no anything. Yeah, I'm struggling to think that there is a single first party, second party developed game for PlayStation that's coming out in the next couple of years. I guess I'll leave it at that. Call of Duty Black Ops and Call of Duty Black Ops 2 are now available for the PS4 and 5. Astrolabe Games announces its 26 to 2027 lineup, PS5 physical release manifesto. Which, okay, there's a whole list of games here. I don't recognize any of them, so because of that, it's really hard to know anything from that. So we'll just watch this trailer. There definitely is a possibility as I do the fall list cleanup that games like this may have made a Steam page and then I just won't ever see them again. Not because the games never come out, which is also a huge possibility, but because there's just not any big news press releases when the games do come out. But I can't really change the policy either. If a game has no release date listed on the Steam page, I don't have enough space on the fall list to keep those games on the list. Particularly if it's a game that just doesn't interest me. Half of these games do look fairly interesting. We'll just have to wait and see how many of them actually come out. And I mean, this is quite a large amount of games being shown off with varying visual styles. So we may very well see that Astrolabe Games becomes more of a bigger publisher. Might also be an interesting move to put out a decent amount of games right now, since so many other games are avoiding GTA 6. Noticeably, I don't think any of those games really would compete for the same audience as GTA 6. Yeah, only one of those games actually opened up a link and has a thing. So let's see if I can open up all of these tabs. That's a decent amount of tabs to open up at once. And we'll see what that does. I may open up a whole bunch of Gamatsu articles too, talking about those games. Arguably, maybe I should eliminate the not opening of all the Steam links on a page and only opening of one Steam link limitation, but I'm not sure. Because every time there's a Humble Bundle, then you tend to get several games opened. It's really not that bad, and if we're saving time in so many other places, there is definitely a point to make that I should go back and get rid of that. So yeah, this one was already on the fall list. This one is on the fall list but doesn't have a release date. So theoretically I should take it off the fall list. This one doesn't have a release date. This one doesn't have a release date. Yeah. I definitely should get rid of that limitation. This one doesn't have a release date either. Although it does look interesting. This one looked fairly different, but no release date. These all could be fairly smaller games, medium-sized games. But that's kind of what people want, too. So we can't deny that there is a real desire for those kinds of systems. I have suspect why my fault list is not loading up is that the number one slot or some slots have a game that's been completely delisted in them, and that's causing the bug to pop up. So yeah. Not sure that actually the Steam links would have even opened up in this case, because you're seeing that each of those tabs I opened actually opened a second page. Yeah. Alright, back to the articles. Montabi adds a Switch 1 and 2 versions that's due out August 6. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3 gameplay first look, 7 minutes of footage, is available on Gematsu. Fright Train launches September 15th. Well, I have no idea what this game actually is. Let's look at its Steam page. Some weird horror game where you play as a dog. Well, that's different. I don't know if that's good, but it's different. Yeah. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3 definitely feels like it is just set in this distant future, past the events of any of Dragon Ball Z or anything recognizable. Let's see, Palworld version 1.0 launch trailer is available. New pals, uncharted regions, and advanced technologies. It is very possible 1.0 won't be the final version of Palworld, but there is a concern that it will be, and that it won't be good enough at that point. I'll leave that there. Prelude Dark Pain launches in early access on July 27th. Fiesta Online is coming to PlayStation, Xbox, and Switch. Don't recognize that game. The Guild Europa 1410 early access has been delayed to September. I think this is the game that actually has the characters from the YouTube series The Guild. I think it was a YouTube series. Maybe not. Yeah, and you can see in this case, I've renamed the tags. I did realize that it probably would make some sense to have some alt tags over it too. So early access is just labeled as early, and then pre-release is labeled as pre-release with a hyphen, which may not be the right way to write that, but it felt like that was the right way to do it. You still have some older timestamps that have the day of the week, which is wasting space. But alt tags are when you hover over something, you get a pop-up, and you can see on Steam pretty much nothing has an alt tag on it. Like you hover over it and no text pops up. So it would be kind of breaking convention to have alt tags on them, but it might also help. But instead what they have is a question mark that you have to click on. But yeah, early access, planned release date. Yeah. And yeah, I do think this is the characters from the guild. But maybe not. It looks a little bit like Felicia Day, and frankly I'd have a hard time recognizing any of the other characters from the guild. It's been so long since I've watched it. The Famitsu sales from the 29th to the 5th have been updated. we'll continue to see Switch games dominate, I'm sure. Although, interestingly, you have some Switch 1 games dominating, and not even particularly games you would expect would dominate. It probably speaks to a lack of interest in the Star Fox game. The Powerful Pro Baseball and Rhythm Heaven are more liked. See, Ganbaro Goemon for PS5 takes the 6th spot, and then are we going to see any other PS5 game until the 20th spot? It doesn't seem like we do. Yeah. I have to assume the CEO of PlayStation looks at these numbers and just really cringes on the fact that there aren't more PlayStation versions of games selling, and there aren't more PlayStation hardware things selling. But maybe he just hyper focuses on the fact that PlayStation 5 Digital Edition is selling very much way more than the PS5 Pro version is, and that is why they're going all digital. It is always a bad week when Xbox is outselling a PlayStation in Japan, because that pretty much tells you that probably foreigners are buying Xboxes, and nobody's buying the original PlayStation models, which maybe just aren't on shelves too. Let's see, side games: Project Awakening, Lost Order, and Garnet Arena Mages of Magicary still are in development. Okay, so I guess they felt a need to say all of these games still are in development, although they may all be mobile games. Yoshi and the Mysterious Book demo is now available. You can play through early stages of the game, which probably does speak to the desire of Nintendo for more people to play that game. Arguably, I think all games should have demos on day one. It did seem like for a while there we were getting to that point, but yeah, it doesn't really feel like that's the case. And if we aren't going to get demos that are automatically made for games, then the 2 hours, no questions asked refund policies that Steam has becomes just more viable and more important. And honestly, since a lot of demos don't carry over progress, it does make a lot more sense to have the 2 hours no question asked policy for a game. And people who make games that last less than 2 hours should just have to learn to stop doing that, in the same way that people who make poison food should learn not to be chefs. We have a headline here. Bloomberg says that Obsidian's Entertainment canceled the Valve sequel and starts work on a Fallout title amid layoffs. This is technically Bloomberg, but it really is just Jason Schreier, who is the only name that ever gets credited from Bloomberg. And I imagine he's mostly just a contract worker who works independently. He probably has some people under him, but I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of it. He is the person, if you were going to leak some information out and you worked in the game industry, he's the person to leak information to, I'm sure. But yeah, I've never heard of any other article from Jason Schreier or Bloomberg other than these kinds of leaks. Which, yeah, being just a leak desk reporter is not something that I think mainstream game journalists really need, or will get that many leaks anyways. Yeah. It is questionable whether this new Fallout title will be anything that actually sees the light of day, though, because I could certainly see there being a second round of layoffs, with just more studios getting shut down and more games getting canceled. Yeah, they're going to be very late to the party, even if they did make a New Vegas 2 to match up with the Fallout TV series, which is probably the only reason why they're doing a Fallout game, other than they had no other idea. It would be really crazy if they made just like a Fallout 1 remake that's top-down isometric, small pixel art. Let's see, the Crew Motor Fest is coming to the Switch 2 on October 8th. I guess I don't have anything more to say about that. Twisted Tower launches August 18th. Let's see if we have a Steam page for that. Apparently not. Yeah, particularly moving racing games to the wishlist is questionable. And then Buckshot Roulette is now available for Xbox One and Series. This is another game where I question whether I really want to play it just because of YouTube's censorship policies. Alright, before we go on the Gaming on Linux articles, I think I would like to take a small break, so I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So the headline I saw says PS5 has put a damper on gaming. 45% of PlayStation enthusiasts seriously considering leaving Sony for PC. This is on r/technology of Reddit. So yeah, if nearly half of all PlayStation enthusiasts move to PC, then the numbers might be a lot higher or a lot lower. Either way, really. As far as non-enthusiasts, I imagine enthusiasts might stay with PlayStation a little bit more, but on the other hand, it might be the exact opposite. Non-enthusiasts may not care what system they're playing on, and particularly if you have a Steam machine that just works more than even running Windows on a pre-built, moving to PC for non-enthusiasts might make more sense. Although, at a certain point then, that's moving to SteamOS instead of moving to PC. Let's go through the Gaming on Linux articles. I imagine a lot of people are talking, but the difference between talking and actually doing is vast. Because, yeah, people very possibly won't even be too upset about the disc thing by the time the PlayStation 5 breaks and they actually are thinking about replacing it with a PlayStation 6. Let's see, the great real-time strategy game Tempest Rising has the Yeti's Wrath DLC being announced. Alright, I don't recognize that game, but it is on my wish list. Yeah, at some point I do need to go back and play the rest of Command and Conquer games, and then I'll think heavily about a game, very possibly this game. Like, this game really does look like it is in the vein of Command and Conquer. So, yeah. That might very well be what you're looking for. Although I'm not sure exactly what I am looking for. Really, I'd like to play Command and Conquer and then jump into like Warcraft 1 and 2 and then jump into StarCraft and highlight some of the classic real-time strategy games without getting too deep into playing modern real-time strategy games. Although I wouldn't mind playing something like Tempest Rising. I just don't want to become a person that only plays real-time strategy games. Just don't have enough time for that. Transport Fever 3 devs showcase new features and vehicles. Okay, read that article if you're more interested in that. I don't think I will be. The hope here is after today's stream I will have changed the follow list enough, either by adding games or removing games, that the follow list will load up again. It is also possible that the database just got corrupted and they just are automatically restoring from a backup. You can build and manage a floating ship city on a sentient alien planet in Rogue Carrier. Yeah, it could be any kind of like server downtime issue that is causing the follow list not to open up. It could also be that I hit the servers too often, even though I'm hitting them fairly slowly. Just there might be a maximum amount of times you can reload the page over the course of a couple days. The idea of them monitoring it past that point or permanently blocking somebody is unlikely. Takes too much storage space to log that data for thousands of users, millions of users probably. Gaming on Linux says Power World 1.0 is here with lots of new content. Which, okay. Doesn't seem like the change list here is too much. And I do wonder if we aren't going to hit a point where Palworld is a lot like Minecraft in that the 1.0 is your guaranteed experience, but then there might just be years of adding more content. It still definitely feels like it is just more of an edgelord Pokemon game. And it seems like if this is not the 1.0 trailer, I don't know why the Pal Spheres would be back. Because I thought they took those out. But maybe that part of the lawsuit that got tossed was around the Pokeball concept. And so maybe Pal Spheres are back in the game. I can't really blame a parent for saying, hey, you can play Pokemon, but you can't play Palworld because Palworld is too violent. It's also kind of a very different kind of game. But, I mean, you are drawing a pretty narrow line in the sand if that is the case. And funnily enough, Pokopia might be more of the game to compare Palworld to now, in that there's kind of a little bit more of that in Pokopia. Yeah, in a funny way, Pokopia may be stealing, maybe accused at least of stealing concepts that Palworld had, except for the fact that all of those concepts are pretty generic concepts that have been around forever. Yeah, at some level, I kind of want to make the argument that Palworld might not have as good or of an interesting story as far as collecting gym leader badges and becoming the very best, which Pokemon has long since given up the idea of becoming the very best and collecting all the Pokemon. But to even try and make that argument would be to pretty blatantly imply that Pokemon's single-player storyline is good, and it really isn't. So yeah, that trailer looks fine. Maybe it will just constantly get updates as long as it keeps on getting sales. It has a reason to get updates, but it is also just going to be in a weird position because most games that do constantly get updates have DLC coming to them or microtransactions in them or something. Minecraft is one of the few exceptions in that case. I could see that over the years Palworld might be the new Minecraft. Okay, moving on, Steam Machine and SteamOS compatibility ratings appear on Steam. Valve has rolled out these ratings on the store, which, yeah, we'll have to see a Steam page for how that really breaks down. And it definitely looks like they're creating a very different system now where it's Steam Deck has this logo, Steam Machine has this logo, and SteamOS just has text. And the number of factors to run on the Steam Deck seems to be longer than the number of factors to run on the Steam Machine, which seems to be longer than the number of factors to run on SteamOS. Which, yeah, that definitely doesn't feel like they really want to say too much. They just want to slightly imply that you're safe to try and play this game on a Steam Deck or Steam machine or SteamOS without promising anything. So with my whole changing and turning of the pages vertically, where is this compatibility page? I see Steam Deck compatibility here. If I click learn more, it pops up this way. Okay. So it's just a whole pop-up box. At least that's how I'm seeing it. Showing these versus these. And they are warning you first time setup requires an active internet connection, which I imagine might be required for all games on Steam, but maybe not. But yeah, the requirements to be legible on the Steam Deck, in-game interface text to be legible on the Steam Deck, is dropped for a Steam machine. And certainly I wouldn't be surprised if these verifications are very loose verifications. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a completely automated process or just taking the publisher's word for it in many cases. It's not particularly surprising that Ubisoft, which would have a different contract with Steam, would be one of the first games to have that new notification system, or at least have it be noticed. Cloudbreaker is a demo that will hook with your inventory management bullet heaven mixture. Hook you with an inventory management bullet heaven mixture. Okay, there might be something there. If it has an actual release date, I would put it on the follow list. Stone Age 4X game Folk Emerging arrives August 26th. I still get a lot of ads for the same 5 or 6 mobile games on Facebook, and all of them have this weird lewdness in the ads that just really isn't going to exist in the actual game, and what they show you, the actual gameplay in the game, isn't even really going to exist in what is in the game. Like, seriously, if I was a crazy billionaire, I would just fund a game company to make mobile games that are actually like the ads. But yeah, that doesn't happen. I suppose maybe since a lot of mobile games of the garbage kind are probably being developed in China, that might explain a lot there too. If China doesn't allow adult games to be made, and it's straight up illegal, you'll get arrested type stuff, then the Chinese company making a boring generic mobile game and then hiring some foreigner to make an ad to sex it up would make some sense at that point. Yeah. Meanwhile, though, I do suspect we are going to, I'll put this one on the follow list, probably just see a vast amount of Japanese and Korean mobile games start to come out, but we'll see if they actually advertise on Facebook or if they advertise elsewhere. Moving on, Linux Mint Cinnamon is finally Wayland ready. Cinnamon is their desktop, which is fine, and certainly Cinnamon desktop would have been one I might have suggested 5-10 years ago. Now at this point, though, I can't imagine there's any reason to put any focus or effort on anything other than KDE Plasma and KDE desktops in general, since that is where And Wayland support seems to be the best implemented so far. Of course, getting KDE installed on Linux Mint. I don't know if you can actually do that. Let's see, Linux Mint KDE. See if they have a flavor. Linux Mint does not officially provide KDE Plasma Edition. You can install KDE Plasma on Linux Mint by using the command apt install KDE Plasma Desktop, KDE Standard, or KDE-full, depending on your needs. So yeah, there isn't an official way to do that, which I'm not super surprised by that. A Disgaea Mayhem demo is now available. Debating on getting My Fair Lady on 4K UHD. And I'm not really sure it's worth $15 because honestly I don't watch movies that are that old, but there's a slick deals for it. Yeah, I don't know why I'm even mentioning that other than I just saw that on my phone and got distracted. Yeah. Let's see, Tuxedo Computers are putting Ubuntu Linux in the bin to use Debian for Tuxedo OS. Yeah, there is a considerable decrease in the number of people that use Ubuntu as a base for their distro forks these days, because Ubuntu itself is doing something so different from Debian. And Debian, if you are going to stay on a Debian based distro, is pretty good at this point. But yeah, I just don't think Debian makes a lot of sense right now unless you are trying to run it on a very underpowered computer, and even then I'm not sure Debian is the right computer distro at that point. Again, Debian having KDE could be installed, but I don't know of anything that really runs KDE based on Debian. Again, I would have suggested Debian as a Linux operating system before SteamOS chose Arch, but now I think Arch makes a lot more sense, particularly when you're talking Baselite and SteamOS being forks and their own distros based on Arch. But yeah, I also wanted to mention, as far as when I was taking breaks, a break earlier, is that Giant Bomb and the Bombcast used to take breaks all the time too. That's why it was pre-recorded. So they just were really good about breaking it up and then editing out those things. If it weren't for the fact that YouTube really wants people to watch live streams, which still gets me more views than pre-recorded, I would just pre-record these and put these out even 12 hours later with the edits in place. It wouldn't even be 12 hours later. I could literally upload and publish the video within less than an hour. But yeah, people want live, and mostly people want live because they want people to interact with the chat, which the vast majority of content creators that go live don't really interact with the chat. The only ones that even do it slightly successful have somebody who is looking at the chat and asking only the important chat message questions to the host. Moving on, Gaming on Linux says Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart also got a nice AMD FSR upgrade. But yeah, this new FSR technology seems to be getting upgraded for people that really are all in on FSR and visuals for games like that, which I don't think there's that many. There is an interesting point that I did want to make around Metroid Prime, in that when Samus Aran at the end of Metroid Prime takes her helmet off, which I assume is as far as the different endings go in Metroid Prime. I suspect you don't get any different endings for speedrunning the game, which would be really hard in Metroid Prime. And I seriously doubt in the 3D environment they're going to have her, in the cutscene I saw, take her entire armor off to show her blue underwear, for lack of a better term. It looks like workout wear, really. But yeah, when she takes her helmet off and they show her face and her hair, it looks pretty great for even modern visual depictions. I wouldn't be surprised if even in Metroid Prime 4, at the end of the game, the visual depiction of what her face looks like is not that much different. I would say that the way Samus Aran looks in Prime 1 makes her have like a longer blonde ponytail, and definitely makes her look more like an American. But yeah, she's not something that I would go as far as saying that's not Samus Aran, whereas the new Tomb Raider game has full-on facial capture of a different actor, and that does make it feel like it's not really Samus Aran. Yeah, let's see. See if I can actually see Prime 4. Now, really, this may very well just be a case where I'm gonna literally have to type helmet off, and I wouldn't even be super surprised if the game didn't even show her with the helmet off. But yeah, by all means, compared to Prime 1, there's more strands of hair and more polygons for this one probably pre-rendered cutscene. But I suspect it really doesn't look that much different in people's memories compared to Prime 1. Which really goes to show that the graphics haven't improved that much, particularly when you start showing human faces. So the secret ending sees Samus remove her helmet, revealing her face for the first time in the game. But yeah, that typically is as far as I think Metroid games are going to go these days, is that it's just going to have her remove her helmet and show a face, and that's as much as you get. Which, if there is any point to speak to as far as censorship, or self-imposed censorship, the fact that the original Samus Aran and the original Metroid games had her take the full suit off and be a little bit of a cheesecake reveal, which, yeah, definitely the blue suit what was a thing there. has been eliminated. So yeah, Nintendo self-censoring. Although in fairness, Nintendo has always tried to go pretty family friendly, so them self-censoring from years and decades ago is not surprising. Here is Metroid Prime Remastered. Let's see if we can click on this article. They only have a picture of the remastered image. Let's see if we can find a picture of the original. Alright. So yeah, here's a decent comparison. You can see there's some jaggedness here, and there's slightly fewer strands in the original Metroid Prime game. Clearly that's been smoothed out. There's more polygons around the ear. The lips seem to have been darkened a little bit, and the jawline in particular seems to have been rounded out a little bit more. It looks like there's a little bit more blush and rouge, like she's wearing makeup, which I would heavily suspect Samus Aran wouldn't be wearing makeup as a bounty hunter in space fighting creatures. The eyes are perhaps slightly forward to the face, although a lot of this may just be they got slightly different frames of which way she was looking. But yeah, slightly different colors. The nose here is more curved and hooked. Again, this might be a slightly different angle where the nose is more straight here. Not a huge change though, and my whole point certainly there is that it doesn't look terrible. What looks a lot worse in Metroid Prime 1 is if you look at like the curvature of the lines on her armor, which is what you see for most of the game, and how pixely and low polygon those are. The shoulder, I don't know what they actually are. She doesn't actually do anything with them. Shoulder pads, I guess. But yeah, I suppose it is worth pointing out that there is two kinds of fans for Samus, Metroid games. Fans that want Samus Aran to be this female bombshell that you never really see in the games. And then there is what Nintendo wants. And then there is the other kind of fan that don't want them to ever take the helmet off. And the one time that they really did try to make Samus more of a personality, or the couple times they've tried to do that, it really just has her pining and talking about Adam, her commander slash slash potential romance, if the game would allow for romance. I do like the idea of her hair just not being in a ponytail at all and just being loose, although that wouldn't really make a lot of sense. In a lot of ways, there definitely are some more Mega Man-esque, I would say. There is some success in that you have her not really be a character or personality, in the same way that Mario's not really a personality, although I would say Mario has been allowed to have more personality in like Odyssey, and Princess Peach has been allowed to have more personality in Odyssey. I definitely feel like there should have been more 2D sections that were inside of Metroid Prime instead of going full 3D. But I don't know really how you would get to that. It may very well have been a mistake to go full 3D in general for Metroid. And yeah, when you start scrolling down really low, the image search starts to give you completely different characters like Batman or B2, 2B. It is crazy though to say that Samus can't be a character and can't have personality. It's just that Nintendo doesn't care enough to really do that. So yeah, I did have some more warm-up rants I probably should have thought through. At some point here, I could possibly have even scripted those to have a checklist of things I want to talk about. But yeah. I certainly would admit that if I was in charge of Metroid, I probably would make a terrible Metroid game, but a decent Samus Aran game. In the sense that I would want to make Samus Aran more of a character. My suggestion there is that she becomes the new president of the Federation, but you don't get told that at the beginning, and it looks like she's actually the new head of the Space Pirates, but actually she's or maybe not the head of the Space Pirates, but in charge of one of the Space Pirate ships, doing undercover work. You could see the Federation opening itself up to more non-humanoid species as a way of moving the story forward. We could see a slightly older, slightly more mature, slightly more empowered Samus Aran, and then you would probably have a new planet infected by Metroids, just the old school baby Metroids, and she would leave her position as president or chief advisor or whatever of the Federation to go take care of that, at which point you get on a new planet, and it is a much more open world planet, not with a motorcycle, not with a big empty desert to hide load screens, and a whole new series of events set off by Metroids showing up every now and then, but also perhaps going into a new direction with new technologies, instead of just collecting the same items over and over again. Of course, I would want Morph Ball and Speed Ball and things like that, but I think there's room for new abilities, and it certainly would set things off interestingly if you don't lose your abilities that you have by default. So all the Chozo designed weapons and things would just be there, and then you would probably upgrade and replace them. Maybe put her on a planet that is fairly technologically advanced, but it's been wiped out by the Metroids in a matter of weeks. So, like, because of that, you're going into laboratories very often and finding technologies that are new and newly developed. Yeah, and as far as the story of Samus Aran, I just would want her to talk and develop a personality and have good writing to her before you go any further. Just, for the most part, don't have her have much relationships at all. It makes a lot of sense that she would spend most of her time alone and just not really capable of talking to people and forming relationships and things like that. And that she could be very militaristic, and almost certainly she's going to be a little bit rage-filled and a little bit racist against Metroids, for lack of a better term. Let's see. Spider-Man Remastered, Miles Morales, and Spider-Man 2 all got AMD FSR upgrades. They just put out this FSR 4 versions of AMD GPUs that they said they weren't actually going to add FSR 4 to, and they got kind of forced into it. So yeah, the really fancy looking visual games. Makes sense. Suppose you might even have Samus Aran pass the torch to a new character. It would make sense for a lot of these games that are so old to have Samus Aran settle down, maybe have kids, maybe take on an apprentice, or something like that, for two-player co-op, or for just ways to move the story forward. Similar ways, it would be very interesting if Pokemon games took Ash Ketchum and turned him into a father and had just a whole new generation of kids show up, which they tried to do with the Pokemon anime, but I haven't heard anybody mention the anime since Ash Ketchum was no longer the main protagonist. Which, in fairness, Ash Ketchum isn't actually in the Pokemon games. It's always been Red, and in most Pokemon games it's not even Red you're playing as far as modern Pokemon games. I'm rambling here. New Steam beta brings improvements for Steam Input, Remote Play, and Steam Controller. That is certainly one of the conversations still to be had, is that maybe the Steam Machine is just a more powerful streaming box that would connect to a much more expensive, much more powerful PC in the other room. That argument really falls away though with the cost of the Steam Machine. It would have made a lot more sense if the Steam Machine was $600 instead of $1,000 to start. But yeah, the thought there is still around for extremely rich people. That brings us to video game news, and I'm noticing we are going longer today, maybe because there was just more news today. But yeah, we're back to 3-hour streams at this point. So GameDeveloper.com has, quote, "We mean business, Xbox union workers fighting back with a Save the Devs rally on July 15th. It'll be interesting to see what happens there and how much it gets reported on. Also, Sharma joining the Federal Reserve Advisory Task Force days after laying off thousands at Xbox, which I wouldn't be surprised if that's what got her the job. I still question who approved this. This task force. It is very possible this task force is a impotent, pointless task force, but I wouldn't bet on that. Eurogamer and VGC 24/7 veterans launch a new independent site. Again, this kind of news would not even be reported on if I or anybody new launched a new site. Let's see, the fired Marathon director says he settled the lawsuit with Sony. And then let's see, GameDeveloper.com says a risk-adverse video game industry is failing marginalized developers. Nazi Furry has been inundated with praise for pitching Spicy Card Battler, the Arab League of Misfits. So why is funding yet to materialize? Well, to begin with, you're calling your card battler spicy, and then your titles, the Arab League of Misfits, and then the screenshots here definitely look like there are images here of either revolutionary / terrorist activity. I would suspect this might be revolutionary regardless. So you're hitting pretty controversial topics. So is this a marginalized developer because they self-marginalized and didn't make something more mainstream, and then now we're expecting somebody to fund their work? Or is this a marginalized developer because publishers wouldn't want to touch a game like this with a 10-foot pole? Which is somewhat of a fair question, but I think it's because they self-marginalized. And yeah, publishers certainly are retracting, it seems, and spending less money on fewer games, not willing to take risks. Inherently, if you are going to take a risk and make a spicy game or a risky game, you are going to have to self-fund and be independent, and you should have known that from day one. Yeah, about 3/4 of the game's ideas that I might have were probably going to be so weird or spicy or something that they would have to be self-funded, and I just would know that up front. And honestly, dealing with publishers doesn't just solve all your problems overnight. It might solve some problems, but it might create a lot more. Let's see, there's plenty of other games that definitely don't get funding. Moving on, Xbox has laid off 379 ZeniMax workers in Maryland. That includes 213 employees at the Elder Scrolls Online developer ZeniMax Online Studios. So there is about 100 more, 166 more people that overall have been laid off from ZeniMax. Which, in fairness, I have been banging the drum for years that ZeniMax workers should be laid off. Mostly I was feeling that the management at ZeniMax should be laid off, but the overall ZeniMax company, parent company, should probably be shut down. There's just no reason for the developers, Bethesda, for instance, to not just be under direct control of Microsoft. Blizzard also has eliminated, quote, a small number of roles in China. The news comes with Activision, Blizzard's parent company, cutting jobs across the board. Yeah. This probably means in China you don't have to report how many people you laid off, so a small number could be any number, basically. Yeah. To go back to Samus Aran for a second, like, there is kind of a pretty good split comparison to like Samus Aran and the characters from Overwatch, in that they really don't have that much of a backstory or personality, because the gameplay itself doesn't really benefit by having that much backstory or personalities. Despite that, there is definitely a lot of fans out there that would like to see the characters have more of a story and personality, but those may very well be a different kind of fan that wants something very different. And then Atari has appointed Andre Deptola as president of Atari Europe. Deptola calls Europe a strategically important region for Atari. This is the Atari that owns the name Atari, not the actual original Atari, which has sold its names multiple times. And so far, the new Atari seems like they've done some good things, but they really haven't done anything amazing or great. It is questionable, playing on a Steam Deck in particular, whether FSR4 is the way to go for Spider-Man games. Alright, and that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam. Now, even though things are now back to being in order, it still is the case that anything with AI is being automatically closed. So, there is a small possibility here that I will still manage to be done under 3 hours, which, if that is what happens, that's not terrible. And I'll just say keep your eyes here, and if this lights up before the page closes, that means I'm putting it on the follow list. Because I don't want to just say, I'll give that a chance. Multiple times if I'm swiping down, I'm closing the tabs. There is something about WASD in that it's using just my 3 middle fingers, not the pinky or the thumb, where if I was doing home row keys, which I really haven't done home row keys in a very long time, I would move everything over to the left by 1 as far as my finger placement goes. Yeah, I'm just doing whatever feels most comfortable. I still don't have, I didn't work on the closing as to, so I still don't really know why something like this, when I click nothing at all on the page and hit C, why it doesn't close. Now when I click on the page and hit C, doesn't seem like it's doing anything. I may have just disabled C completely. I should probably have the page close when I hit the shift key of my pinky. This is an interesting thing. I don't recognize a Brick Breaker game that would have 70s era pinup girls on it as a reward. There definitely were some games like that in barcades, arcade machines specifically for bars. Still trying to find a good like coin pusher game. Give that one a chance. Noticeably, I still am going to be putting a lot more games on the follow list day to day, and that does feel like I am going to just have to do more follow list cleanup at the end. That is still something not really thinking about or accommodating for. It's just how much extra time will it take to do a follow list live. But yeah, increasingly I do think doing the follow list cleanups live does make more sense. Certainly is nice though to just have that level of confidence that everything we're seeing here claims to not have used AI. It was sad to come to the realization that probably over half of all games coming out on Steam now are using AI in some way. But for me, I think that is also probably just in line with the realization that probably significantly more than half of people in schools and colleges were cheating. There was a whole Reddit post that's debatable as far as the results, but a professor suspected that there was a lot of AI use / cheating in general, and so he had a in-person test versus a at-home test, which in fairness, at-home test probably wouldn't have as many time limits and would be open book / you can use the internet to look up things. So it would be a very different kind of test anyways. And I could imagine that a lot of people's scores might even be affected by having a test set up in the morning when people are night people. But yeah, I do suspect that there is a lot of cheating going on here. This is an MMO dress up rhythm dance game. That is surprising that you'd call it an MMO, because there definitely are some bad paths to go down, and pretty obviously being a small game, a medium-sized game even, and making a game that is online focused or requires online will just guarantee you failure. There's just no way you're going to get enough people to play your game to maintain a healthy online community. Even the Sword Art Online Echoes of Aincrad game seems to be struggling, and that's a single player game. And so it's getting mixed reviewed, and there's going to be like a anime movie tying into that, and that is going to come out probably after the whole game has pretty much been abandoned. So we do have a couple of awry articles. We have a GameDeveloper.com article just repeating that the mobile game Mario Kart Tour is winding down. Then we have a couple more games, which actually, if I just close those two, then we're at the fall list cleanup. And if I just don't do anything for the fall list cleanup, which I don't think I really need to, we are still going to be at exactly 3 hours, which that is an amazing amount of success, I have to say. Because yeah, I definitely was not expecting that potentially we would have a 3-hour stream when things get a little bit more busier. A lot of times when things get more busy, there is a decent amount of other stuff to deal with. Yeah, so yeah, even on a long stream like this, if I was doing fall list cleanup, that potentially would be just 15, 20, maybe 30 more minutes. But yeah, I'm still doing a fall list cleanup right now, off screen, and once I get down to like 1,000, I think it will be very manageable there. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.